We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. So welcome everybody to the end of season 1 of Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle. Yay! And we have Austra here today. She's gonna kind of interview me. We're gonna kind of go over some the season.
Yeah, and I think it might be interesting for listeners to also hear about your journey and maybe what you got out of the podcast. I can share some stuff maybe for myself as well along the way.
Yeah.
Because I think it's one thing that maybe listeners can relate to their stories or their journeys throughout listening to the podcast, but it's something else with you, and also like all the what's happening like behind the scenes and how much work it actually takes to do this, because it's not just like just recording or just sitting down for that conversation. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes,
right?
And I think what would be interesting to start with is, do you have like any favorite memories or favorite, and it doesn't have to even be recorded, favorite memories or like favorite stories or something that stands out for you that was impactful for you?
You know, I don't know if I have one particular story, but I will tell you, I have met so many amazing people. You know, people bravely coming and telling their stories and, you know, in great detail, and their healing journey, and the heart of wanting to be able to help others is profound. I've had amazing experts on sharing really good resources. I've had so many aha moments. You can see them in the podcast. You can see me you can see the mind going, and you can see me going, oh, wow, there were so many aha moments. So, I mean, I think my favorite thing is the people that I've met. I've really met some amazing people, both on the podcast and off the podcast. I would say that's probably my favorite. I'm meeting my people.
And even like with that, like what about those people?
Well, they're like-minded. So so many of them, if they have, most of them have been through trauma. Some of them have not, but they certainly have the heart to help. And I think that's what it is that, and that's really the part of hand in hand, the name hand in hand in my podcast name is that we're kind of come together, and we're going to help each other out, and we're going to help others out. And so, you know, meeting people that have that heart of wanting to help others and just eradicate childhood abuse if we could. I mean, that would be awesome.
I'm thinking what was standout moments for me, because even as I sit and think about it, there's literally like plenty of podcasts or guests that jump at me, and I'm like, oh, you talked about, oh, there was also this, and there was this, and there was this.
I know there was a lot.
And
it was so diverse. That's what I really liked. It was diverse.
Yeah, you covered a lot of ground.
Men and women, as well as people from literally all over the world that came on and shared their stories. And what's sadly true is you can see so many commonalities. It doesn't matter where you're living in the world. When it comes to childhood abuse and trauma, we're all kind of affected the same way.
Yeah, and I remember even like some episodes where there were people sharing their stories, just listening to them and being like, whoa, that's what's going on. Like that's the actual reality that you might not see advertised or put out there as much.
All right.
But I think the question here would be, for me, and I think we had talked about this before, about it feels like it takes a lot of courage to even host a podcast that is talking about those topics, or because like one thing is to share the stories, even like sharing your story, it takes a lot of courage, but also like to give that space for others to do that and hold that space, and know that there's like a lot of horrific stuff that might be shared,
Yeah.
and a lot of times you might not even know like what will be shared. And
Yeah.
so like, how do you have any like comments or that experience of like doing that or hosting that space or giving that space for people to share their stories or share their experiences with like working with others that have gone through experiences?
It's, when I'm doing the podcast and I'm doing the workshop and all that, I try to remember what it was I needed back in the day when I began my healing journey. I'm still on my healing journey, but oftentimes what I need, and I need to be heard. I need to have a voice. I need to be heard, and I need to have the space, the safe space to share. There's a lot of power in those three things. There's a lot of power, a lot of healing that can go on there. And so that's why I understand how important it is to give people a place to have a voice, to be heard, and to give them the space to be able to share. And you're right. Trauma and childhood abuse is not a fun topic. It's not an easy topic. Some people actually refuse to even hear about it. It's too much. Um, and it is heavy. It's not an easy subject, but it, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about it. We've done that for so long, and we need to get it out there. We need to get awareness, and we need to get education out there so that we can start. And it starts with even going back to parents and helping them, right? And helping them to support their children, because oftentimes, the parents are overwhelmed. So yeah, it's creating a space so that people can have that safe place to talk, to share their story, and to be heard.
So question there is like, do you know how you have managed to create that safe space?
I,
Because
I
it's not
know.
like it takes a lot to come on and like just share with with the world like your story.
I know, and we've actually had this conversation before off the recording, and I don't know exactly how it is I create that safe space. I guess maybe what I do is I think about what it is I needed, and I needed someone just to sit quietly sometimes and just hear me and not treat me like I was crazy. Because so often what happened for me is I would get triggered and I would act out as a result of that behavior, which was not good for anybody, including the other people, myself and the other people. And you'd get that look of craziness. And when you try to explain yourself, it's hard to articulate to somebody who has no idea what it feels like to be triggered and what you went through. First of all, you got to be aware that you're doing that. But to try to explain that to somebody and they don't understand and they're looking at you like you're crazy, that ends up spinning you out. And so for some reason, I can go to that space. I can give someone else that space when they're acting completely crazy in their mind because I understand what's going on. And I honestly don't judge them. I actually can empathize
Yeah.
with them. I understand what's going on there. And sometimes people just need to be vocal. Sometimes they just need to say it. They don't need me to try to calm them down or anything. They just need to get out what it is that's going on at that moment. So I don't know exactly. There's certainly not steps that go on in my head of, okay, I need to make
Yeah.
sure I do this. There's certainly things that I include. I don't try to interrupt them. I try to give them my complete attention. But other than that, I'm not sure how I create that safe space, but I know that is something that I absolutely have had a gift of doing for a long, long time. And I'm glad that it comes across on the podcast that way too, because that's really important in this topic.
Yeah, I feel like a big part of it definitely is you being able to be vulnerable,
Oh yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
it's not one sided. It's like
yeah,
you share your crazy stories and I share mine, and we
yeah,
can
yeah,
and we're even like able to in some ways even like laugh about them, or
yeah,
like have not to make the whole story like lighthearted, but being able to look at it as maybe not to add too much negativity to it, or more than needed.
yeah. I
Are
know
there
because it's already
any?
enough.
Yeah, yeah, and we keep carrying that. So
Hmm.
are there any like, there might be a lot, I understand, any like main lessons that you have learned from the podcast, but also like for yourself?
I think the first thing that, and it was surprising to me, is understanding trauma and how understanding trauma and getting educated on it, how empowering that is. That I think out of probably, because there's a lot of things I knew going into doing the podcast. There's certainly a lot I've learned, absolutely, but that was one of the biggest ones. And the reason why I say that is, and it is brought up in a lot of the research I've done. It should be brought up more. Actually, it really needs to be kind of at the forefront. That the importance of understanding trauma and how it affects you gives you confidence. And here's an example. We have behaviors like I was just talking about that we do when we get triggered or when we're traumatized. It's just our childhood wasn't normal, and so we don't always behave normal in the world. And so understanding those behaviors specifically and understanding, oh, okay, so I behaved that way and that came directly from the trauma. And what it did for me is it took it and separated it from my identity. Because what I was doing is all those behaviors, all those actions, my actions were my identity. And what it did is it allowed me to separate it, because it's like, oh, that's not me behaving that way. That's a direct result of the trauma. And so I understood it, and all of a sudden the judgment and the shame dropped, but it also allowed me to understand it so I didn't do it again. Or if I felt it coming up, if I felt a trigger coming up in that situation, I was aware of it and I could get ahead of it and do
What was it?
minimal damage.
What was it in the podcast process or some of the episodes that help you to actually understand it? Like, what were some of the things that gave you that understanding?
Well, one of them was having so many guests on that had so many of the same behaviors that I did, right? So there's a commonality there. Okay, I'm not alone in that. And then having some really great experts come on and explain why we behave that way. And they came on without any kind of judgment whatsoever, just really, I'll tell you why you act like that. It makes complete sense why you behave that way. And so those two things, I think, were two of the biggest things that kind of helps me in that area. And then, of course, the research I did, all the research I do behind the scenes, because I do want to understand more and more about trauma and the effects of it, and most importantly, the different modalities that are out there that help us.
That's an interesting thing that you shared, because I think that's one of the powerful things about your podcast, where we each learn differently, or we get those aha moments differently.
Mm-hmm.
So for somebody, it might be hearing expert explaining it or giving some definition or some explanation when you're like, oh, okay, it starts to make sense.
Right.
For somebody else, or on in addition to that, if you now listen to somebody sharing their story that you can relate to, and you now hear a bit how they navigated it and how they kind of dealt with it and how they got to the other
Mm-hmm.
side,
Mm-hmm.
then you're like, oh, okay. So it's, I think the interesting piece is that even though in some ways those are different formats, where like there's one person sharing their story, there's somebody else that is like an expert, or there's like a combination of both. I feel like through that there's so much that we can learn, not only from like, and I think that's the finding that balance between like theory and experience.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of cover the ground like really well with having people who come on, they share their stories of overcoming and healing, but also have experts that are able to walk through of kind of like what exactly happened
Yeah.
from like either scientific or
Mm-hmm.
psychology perspective, or to understand like what's actually the mechanisms that are happening behind all this that we go
Right.
through.
Right. Because our brains are so complicated, and that's the thing that one of the things that I learned is trauma just makes us do really odd stuff that if we didn't have that trauma, we wouldn't do. Um, it does. And I've said it throughout the podcast that I was in survival mode for so much of my adult life. And there's so many things that you do in survival mode that you wouldn't do outside of survival mode. And I I say too, it's interesting what comes out of you when you get squeezed.
Yeah. So with the podcast itself, what are have you had like any maybe like challenges or setbacks or
Yeah.
anything like that you dealt with?
Well, dealing with the imposter syndrome and dealing with, those kind of things. And, the thought sometimes comes up like, who do I think I am doing this? And I'm like, I'm Lisa Tickle. That's who I am, so I sometimes get in my own way. Um, and I just think, because I goof up and I'm always trying to find ways to do this podcast better. And I come from someone who has zero experience in doing any kind of TV, whatever. So there's been those setbacks, but I'm certainly feeling more comfortable, and I love meeting the people that I'm doing. And I get and anymore when I do the podcast, I really get caught up in the conversation and forget I'm actually on the podcast. Um, so it's just that, and realizing, God, it could just be me. I don't have to put on any kind of show. It's not a show. It's just
Yeah.
me being me, and that's okay. And if, you know, I'm going to goof up, and so still, it wasn't that long ago I would never even consider doing something like this. There's no way you're putting me in front of a camera. There's no way I'm going to tell any of my stories. And now, you know, I come along and a story comes into my head. And I'm like, oh, I haven't told that one. But I'm like, you know what? Here's the deal. If it's going to help one person listening, it's worth it. It's worth it.
Do you have any like advice to anybody who might be now on the verge of having doubt and wanting to do something or wanting to start something, whether it's something related to healing or something to like some of their passion projects or something? Like, what did you say to them?
Well, and we've talked about it before, taking baby steps.
Yeah.
So, you can, if it helps you, and this is what I did in the beginning, is I would take little steps and kind of see how it felt. And again, you can't always go by your feelings because your feelings are going to be a little fickle sometimes. But did it blow up in my face? Did it hurt anybody? And if those things didn't happen, then it was okay. And then take the next step. Because sometimes it's just, and that little bit of step that you take and it works out, builds your confidence and builds a little momentum to take that next step. And so sometimes those steps aren't going to work out. It doesn't necessarily mean you're on the wrong road. Maybe it's not the right time. Maybe
Yeah.
you need to take a bigger step. I mean, it could, and that's the thing, that don't feel like everything that doesn't work out is just a failure, because that's not true. It's not just a failure, and if it didn't work out, learn from it, and changing that mindset of going into it rather than, God, I hope I don't fail. God, I hope I don't fail. Of, okay, I'm going to screw up and then I'm going to fix it, or I'm going to do something different, is huge. And that was the wall that I kept bouncing into that I couldn't see,
Mm.
because it had to be perfect to get through that wall. And I finally realized it doesn't. It's not going to be. That's the thing you have to realize. It is never going to be perfect. It's just not. So get rid of that expectation first of all. But just take that little step and then just evaluate it and process it. See how that worked out. If nothing horrible happened, take the next step.
Yeah. It's so interesting how we can get in our
Head.
heads about stuff, and not take any steps or make those
Oh
steps so
yeah.
big that we think that for the step to matter it has to be
Yeah.
huge.
That's the other thing, is you end up looking at the whole picture and it looks so overwhelming and so big, and you don't know where to start, and then it's just like, I'm just not even gonna try. It's just too big. That's a mistake I used to make a lot. And that's why I say you
And
gotta
now,
break it
like,
down.
yeah, imagine if you now like looked, even now, like looking back, you're like, this is episode 113.
I know. I seriously, I know. I look at that in awe. I was banging away at them. I remember like, oh, I got 20. Oh, I got 30. Oh, and it's just like, yeah, it's been a lot. It's been a lot.
And even like maybe what we could do is, can you talk through the pillars that you're covering in
Oh yeah.
the podcast?
So yeah, I added a new pillar that's definitely going to be part of next season. So there's four pillars to my podcast. And the number one goal of the podcast is to help shorten people's pain, because I had been on a long journey and there wasn't much out there to help me. And so the idea is, to help put stuff out there that can help people on their healing journey, whether they've just started or they're deep into their journey. And so there's four pillars. And the first one is allowing people to share their stories. And they've got to be a certain part of the way into their healing journey. So meaning at the end of the podcast, there's hope. I don't want someone that's deep in their journey and just, that's not a good place. So anyway, they can tell their story as detailed as they want or not. It's up to them. And then of course, share their healing journey and the modalities that they've used. The second pillar is bringing on experts that bring on resources and tools and tips on how to navigate the whole healing journey. And I've had some that have been specific on topics or just generally. So that's been great. The third is bringing awareness to areas of abuse that you may not always be aware of, so, or have much knowledge of. And an example was Bobby Click. And I don't, off the top of my head, I don't remember the episode number, but I know his name. He's amazing. He's an attorney in Denver, and he specializes in bringing awareness and investigating abuse that happens to children in sports. And here in the United States, and he gives the statistics all over the world, but here in the United States, there's 20 million children a year that play sports, and over a third of them are abused every year. That's a lot. I mean, if we could just tap into that alone and educate that group alone, that would be massive. So that's what it is. And I'm finding a lot of things. There's like financial abuse, there's medical abuse, there's so many. I've
Legal.
got a whole list. It's just crazy. And then the fourth is the new one, and it's prevention. And this is an area that I'm focusing more on, preventing childhood abuse or trauma. We can't always avoid trauma altogether. Things happen to us that are completely out of our control, but at least we can get education out there to help reduce that trauma. For instance, the thing that comes to my head is if there's a child out there that has, a sister or brother that's ill, that might even have a deadly disease, that changes the dynamic of the family alone. And that trauma is not avoidable. You can't avoid that, right? But there's certainly things that we can do to help the parents and both children, both the child that is ill and the one that is not. And so that's the kind of stuff I want to get out there, resources for parents, because we've got parents right now that are just overwhelmed. It's just too much. And they don't even have the time or even take the time to go find resources to help them. It's not on the forefront of their mind. So if I can give them resources to help them while they're driving to work, listening to the podcast that'll help them that day, then that's really important. So that's the four pillars of the podcast.
What I'm curious, and I can imagine that some people listening also might be curious, because you can hear the passion as you're talking about it, like and you're like you're really committed to it. And it's
Yeah,
as I said
it's my
in
life.
my podcast, when you were on, I said that like it's one of the reasons we actually got back to my podcast. And what do you know, like what is it, or why is it that you're so locked in, you're so driven to help people, and to do as much as you can to actually do get to that place where like you are helping people to shorten their pain and their suffering?
I think the thing that motivates me is I didn't have that. And I
Mm.
know how it feels not to have that. I know what it feels like not to have people help me when I was a kid, when I was suffering and going through all that. When I lost my mom, and my family wasn't around, family friends weren't around. Everybody just kind of, they were dealing with their own stuff, I guess, but I didn't have the support. I did have some support from some people in my adult life, but it wasn't the help that I really needed. It truly wasn't. They weren't qualified. And so I did a lot of this journey alone, and it was a long journey. It was a lonely journey. It was a very difficult journey. And so I say it on the podcast a lot, beauty from ashes. And so what I'm trying to do is make beauty from ashes from my life. Right. So there was a lot of stuff that happened to me and I didn't have the support. And so if there's one person I can help, of course, I want to help more. My goal is to be able to help as many people not experience that, because that keeps you from really doing that deep, deep, deep healing and getting you to the place that you really should be in your life. Because we're not supposed to suffer. We're not supposed to spend 30, 40 years suffering from something that happened to us as a child that was not our fault at all. There's nothing we deserved. There's nothing we ever did to deserve to be abused as children. Nothing. Nothing.
I have an interesting question for you.
You have a lot of interesting questions.
How do you think you have changed through the podcast, or doing the podcast, or learning, and either people that you have connected with and lessons you have learned and stories that you have heard? How have you changed?
It's helped me to see people different. It helps me to
Hmm.
understand that people act out for a reason. And when I think about the Lisa 20, 30 years ago, how judgmental I was about people who acted out, I now
Yeah.
get it. People act out for a reason. Things happen for a reason. A child doesn't wake up one day and is just a brat. That's just not how it goes. People don't wake up and one day they're just a jerk. Something happened, whether it's mental illness or, they got upset about something, they just don't know how to articulate it. But, I think that's what's been a huge game changer in my mindset. Because as I understand more and more about trauma and the effects of trauma and the behaviors of trauma, and it doesn't just affect that person. I mean, it goes out. It goes
Yeah,
out and
ripples.
affects everybody. I think that's the thing. And it sounds, because I stop and I think about it, I think, God, that just sounds kind of, well, duh, but it's not duh. It's not. I understand that. It doesn't mean that there aren't consequences for
Yeah.
behaviors. There's still consequences, but there's at least an understanding of why they did it.
So, are there any ways how you see yourself differently?
Yeah, I have a lot more compassion for myself and empathy, and it is during the podcast that for the first time I heard my abuser's voice in my head barking at me one day. So it's still there, but it was the first time, and I don't remember what the circumstance that caused it. It was something that happened. I don't remember, and it wasn't anything very big and profound.
Yeah.
But I just remember literally walking out of my bathroom and into the hallway and heard her voice screaming at me and belittling me. And it was like, whoa, wait a minute. Where'd that come from? And then I go, okay, no, I want to hear you. What you were saying? What is it you were saying? And I let her say it. And then I shut that voice down. I let her have the voice. But it was almost like, well, that voice was my mom. That voice was my mom. Sometimes it's me.
So partly it could be you having more awareness, being able to see things better about yourself.
Yeah. And my
Um,
behaviors and my thoughts and my actions, understanding them more and getting ahead of them. That's what's really refreshing, of recognizing them and addressing them before I do something that could be harmful.
are there like any kind of to follow along with this, like any tools or any like modalities that you have tried that you learned about in the podcast?
Uh, well, I guess going deeper into a pause, because before the podcast I was definitely someone who recognized that I just need a minute sometimes, like just give me a minute, I just need to process. So there's that. But now it's a little deeper, because now what it does is when I say that, my mind works a little faster. It kind of, okay, what just happened? what just happened? And getting to the root of whatever that is going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm thinking if I have anything, because I remember there were some episodes where it was even like interesting to see you do something that like a
Oh,
guest would like walk you
yeah,
through.
I know.
Um, Are there like any of those that you look back and you're like, oh, that was a pretty cool one, or there was like something interesting?
Some of them, and when I did some of them, I did them really early on, so it was a little bit
Oh yeah,
more awkward for me than it would be now. So I don't know if I
it didn't seem
necessarily.
awkward though.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Oh, good.
At
Because
no
I was
point I was
completely
like,
aware
oh,
of the
it
fact that
seems,
a camera was
yeah,
on me as I was doing this. So, but they were all profound. But I probably would have obviously gotten more out of it had I not
yeah, of
been
course.
paying attention to that. Some of the breathing ones have been really good. I'm always up for learning new breathing techniques because breathing is definitely high on my list of getting me calmed down. And, you know, I do a lot of the box breathing. I don't know what the other one's called, but it's like 6 seconds of breathing in and holding it, similar to the box breathing. But none really stand out. I'm sure I got something out of it, but I think more than anything, there was that part of me too, realizing that, oh my God, how many people are watching this? Because it was early on in the
How
podcast.
how was that? How was that?
Well, yeah, that whole scenario went through my head of, oh crap, everybody's going to see this and I'm going to look foolish. And I'm just like, you know what? I don't care. Maybe somebody will see it and go, oh, that's what I need. I don't know. I just feel like, it's like when I play with my grandson. He's almost 2.5. And I was up in Idaho a few weeks ago and playing with him. And I just get completely silly with him. I make goofy faces, funny sounds, dance. I sing. I don't have a voice. I don't care because you know what? My grandson laughs. He has a great time. We connect. I don't care anymore. He doesn't look at me and go, oh, grandma, you're weird. He laughs at me. We laugh. And so it's kind of similar on the podcast. It's kind of like, okay, I'm putting myself out there, but you know what? It may help some people. And if it does, hallelujah.
I think that's one of the things that I really like that you're, even though a lot of it is like heavy topics, but you,
Yeah.
in some ways, you make it fun or you make it, I don't want to say entertaining. It's not, it
Lighter.
might not. Yeah, it's lighter where you actually feel like you're having a good time while you're like
And I
working
am.
on yourself, and yeah,
I am.
and it's also the experience for me as somebody who is watching, where like I'm watching and I'm
Mm.
actually like enjoying the conversation, and I don't feel like okay now I'm doing like deep healing work, you know,
Oh, yeah.
which like there's a place for that as well. But one thing that I have found, and I'm like more familiar with self development world, is that a lot of times people go so much into it that now it becomes a chore. And I was in that place as well, where now it's
Oh,
like
yeah.
everything has to be self development and
Yeah.
everything is like super serious. And
Yeah.
and there was like day when I caught myself where I was like it was when one of my friends said that like, oh, you're like actually funny, and I'm
Oh, yeah.
like, and I had tried to kind of, especially with like coaching, to put up this like serious front
Right.
that for me to be taken seriously, I need to be like
Yeah.
serious. And but then when I would think about it with my like coaching clients, we would be laughing on our sessions. Like we would be having a lot of fun
Yeah.
while like growing and getting better. So it's
Yeah.
it's something that I think you do a really good job with like bringing that lightness in as well, and also providing to some extent even like sometimes your reactions, it literally is like oh my gosh, like like the way you react, it's I think that the powerful thing about it is how authentic it is. And that's why even like for me when I watch, like I see myself connecting with that, because even like sometimes internally we might have those reactions ourselves, but we don't show it. And then when you
Yeah.
show it, everybody is like, oh, it's okay to kind of be like whoa kind of
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
or like try something out or comment something or have fun or like mess up, which even like to your comment before about wanting it to be perfect, that's where, and I'm pretty sure we have talked about it definitely offline or like off recording, how most of the times we connect over our imperfections, not our
Yeah.
perfections.
If
And I
I
feel
sat
that's,
if I sat up here and acted like my life was absolutely perfect and I don't do anything wrong, who can relate to that? You can relate to my mess ups.
oh yeah, yeah, and it's that, I think that's the interesting. So even like with you putting yourself out there and sharing more of your authentic self, sharing your stories that you might feel like, I don't want to share that. Did
Yep.
you at any moment feel vulnerable or exposed, and how did you manage that if you did?
Oh, I did. I did. I definitely did. I think for the most part is like is some of the stories, because like I'd be sitting here and the guest would be saying something. I'm like, oh, here comes a story in my head of that would, you know,
Yeah.
kind of help that her story along or his story along. And I'm thinking, oh God, I've never shared it. I don't know. I just do it. I don't know. I don't know. It's vulnerable, yeah. It only felt vulnerable as I was realizing I need to tell this story. This is the way it feels. So in the moment I'm like, oh God, I gotta tell this story. Oh my God. And then as soon as I start telling it, I'm like, oh no, this is okay. This is okay. Somebody needs to hear this. That's
And
how
afterwards?
I don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah, it's never been where I'm like, oh, I want to edit that out.
Yeah, yeah,
No, that's never crossed my mind. If somebody
yeah.
here, and here's the thing that crosses my mind too. Somebody might make fun of me.
Mm.
Okay. Well, what are you doing to help people? Okay, make fun of me. Yeah. I'm okay. you know, where before that would have just horrified me. That's why I wouldn't do a podcast. That's exactly why I wouldn't do a podcast, is because somebody's going to make fun of me. I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. Somebody's going to make fun of me. And then what? Okay. So they make fun of you. And then what? That became my identity.
That's a big full circle that you have gone
I
then.
know, right?
To now be like 113 episodes in.
Yeah.
And not
From
only
starting
like,
out.
oh, let's talk stuff that I'm super comfortable about and I'm fully healed.
Well, and here's
um,
another thing that I'll tell that is a vulnerable thing is I've always had the habit of aligning myself with other women who are strong that I would let take over, that I would allow to take over. And so when I was considering doing the podcast, at first I thought, oh, I want to co-host because here we go. This is old stuff. And it never felt right. And I couldn't figure out the people that I thought of that I would consider were people that I would have allowed to just rise up and I would sit back. Does that make sense? And so I quickly realized, no, this I have to do this podcast alone and I've got to make the decisions and I've got to be the one that is kind of in the center. And that's the first time in my life. Because it's the same thing that happened when I did the workshop that I talked about before that I had done. Um, the leader and I that were in the workshop it was amazing. It really was. We saw a lot of women really go deep into healing, but it was real comfortable for me because I'm an introvert, but I can be extrovert. But I really,
ambivert.
yeah. And so it was real easy for me to take the leader that I was working with, who is an extrovert, to just kind of sit back. And I even told her at one point I was thinking about not doing the workshop anymore because I didn't feel like I was offering enough and I was afraid I would hurt the women. And so it was just this place that I always took of, oh yeah, I can be the support system. I can be the one, like at the last workshop, it was in my home. So I took care of I made the safe space for the home and I fixed all the meals and I did all that. And I was completely fine with doing that. And I spoke, but most of the time I made sure I was under the radar. And I had been hearing for a lot of time, long time, that I needed to come out from under the radar. And so that's what the podcast is. I needed to do this. I needed to be the person in charge of it and not have a co-host. And that was
So,
that was making me stretch a lot.
how was that stretching going
First,
through
it was
that?
really uncomfortable, and because I used to ask you a lot of advice, and you wouldn't. A lot of times you'd say, you need to decide. Like you would like, what do you think of this? And you're like, oh, it's a good idea, but what do you think? Like you always pushed it back on me, which is what I need. And so at first it was uncomfortable. And now I think what it's done is it's made me have a very clear vision of exactly, and I know exactly what I want this to look like. I know exactly what I want the workshop that I'm creating to look like and how it's going to affect. So now I'm very comfortable with it. And there's no way I would allow someone to come in and start, you know, redirecting it. Like if I ever did have a, you know, well, with the workshop I do have another leader with me, but on the podcast I don't know if I'll ever have a co-host. I may, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the. Well, technically, I'm a co-host,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
it's like,
you are.
oh,
You're the only one
I'm
I've let
joking.
on be a co-host, but you also, because you also respect
Yeah,
what
like
I'm doing.
yeah, and I do see it as like that's your podcast. Like it's like for me that there's no question about it. And even like any decisions that are made about podcasts, like that's your podcast. It goes through you. And
Yeah.
I think it's and even like with that ownership of it, like now you are so set with it.
Mm-hmm.
Even like with comparing to what you said, like at the beginning, you would have like a lot of questions. Um, Maybe follow up question here would be like, it's kind of like really clear pointing towards the answer, but like what's the power of actually like taking action towards getting that clarity or getting that confidence? Because it's something that I know that I learned big lesson for my podcast when I did my and I'm now like I literally was thinking about it. I'm struggling to take action again. Like I have recorded like 2 episodes. One of them was with you, and then I'm like, oh, I just keep like waiting or like postponing or like I don't have time. I have to focus on this, and that's where I was like, no, you have to like decide on the date when you launch and like just deal with it. You did it before, you can do it like,
Yeah.
and this time I'm even more clear.
Yeah.
But the big thing there, even like in this example, years of self development, and you still do it. You So like what I'm doing is I'm trying to plan everything ahead before I take the maybe the action that at this point matters, which is just launching it. Which is like for the most part, it's actually ready to launch. I have 2 episodes already recorded. Two probably will be solo episodes, so that I can do myself. Um, so like that's where a lot of times what I see, and I want to hear your comment or experience on that is we try to get clarity or that sense of confidence before we take action, before like anything has happened. Even like with the clarity that you have right now on the 4 pillars, a lot of it came through those conversations.
It did. Yeah. My clarity at the beginning of the podcast was to definitely create something that can get help out there.
Yeah.
And I definitely wanted to have experts on. I definitely wanted to have people on to tell their stories. The clarity definitely has come over time as I've talked to people, because part of it is I'm being educated and I'm seeing, oh, what the needs are out there. And so that's how I ended up building the four. Like the 3 pillars kind of came to me, the first two were already there before I started it, which
Yeah.
was giving people a story, bringing on
You just
experts.
clarified them along the way.
It was during, I think, when I talked with Bobby Click that I realized, dang, there's a lot of abuse out there that we either don't know about or we don't understand the depth of. And then with more guests came, wow, we need to do prevention too. Like, let's have a prevention, like helping parents and, that kind of thing. And so the clarity came over time, and the confidence came with the clarity. So it was taking, again, the baby steps. So I still started the podcast still kind of on a wing and a prayer. I really did. I mean, I knew, I was going to have people tell their story, but I didn't know like how to just tell your story, and so, I mean, okay, what happened to you, that kind, but it's more than that. And so that's how I got clarity, though, as I started talking to you. And you're seeing patterns, you're seeing commonalities, and then that's where I saw, like I said, the third and the fourth pillar.
I have a question on like because it's something that I noticed in myself. Like with, have you noticed your maybe like communication skills change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
talk to a lot of different people, different stories, different backgrounds.
Yeah. So my listening skills have definitely gotten better, and my responses. So I'm just careful about what I say and how I say it. And if I need to say it, I'm definitely more aware of that. And um, yeah, definitely. The listening is definitely a big thing for me.
And I think the interesting thing about listening is that it's so, in some ways it's weird how once you develop that skill more, the more you see how much you didn't hear.
It's so true. It's so true. Because if you're not careful, if you're not present, you're going to listen to what you want to hear. You're going to be listening for stuff. You're in tune, like, okay, am I going to hear it? Wait, where what I try to do is just really have an open mind and just listen. I have no idea what you're going to say.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
have you ever experienced someone, you're telling a story, and while you're telling the story, the other person's like they're so ready to wait for you to take a breath so that they can say something. I used to do
yeah,
that.
I've
I
been that
used to do
person.
that. Yeah, I used
I
to do
still
that.
sometimes am.
Yeah, and I used to talk over people all the time, and I just couldn't wait. And that's not listening. That's not, you're listening for a break. That's what you're listening for. That's not listening to somebody. That's not being present, because you're in your head. You're just
Yeah, and you're
you're
repeating
already
what you
you're
want to say.
yeah, you're conjuring up what you want to say, and you're waiting for that moment. And that's not listening. And that's something that I had to retrain myself. People don't always want
Yeah.
to hear what I have to say. It's not always that important.
So speaking on listening, everybody listen up
Woohoo.
as we talk on season 2.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's a lot going on next year.
what's even next year? Yeah, let's
Yeah.
talk about next year. Like what's coming
Yeah.
up next year?
Yeah. So the podcast, yeah. So we're going on to season 2 in January, which I'm really excited about. So we're taking a break from doing new episodes for November and December, but there's lots of great episodes to watch or rewatch. So there's plenty out there for you. Um, yeah, next year, I'm definitely, it's going to be kind of the same format in the 4 pillars. Um, I'm only going to have a recording once a week right now, of the podcast. But one of the other things that we are creating that I am really excited, there's a few things I'm excited about, but there's going to be a video series that I'm creating that is going to be, experts explain trauma. And it's going to be having different experts on, and it's just going to be short clips, kind of anywhere, I don't know, 5 minutes, however long it takes to explain something. So I'm going to start it out with kind of sharing my stuff, some more of my stuff, and letting the experts explain, why I did that, why I behaved that way, or why I thought like that. But I want to open it up to listeners, for you to feel free to be able to come on and share your experiences, maybe get clarity on some of the behavior that you did or questions you may have, and I'm going to have experts. Nothing against coaches. I'm a coach, but I want to have, therapists on that are going to explain this stuff, because I've had so many great therapists on the podcast where they're so good at understanding the science behind trauma and childhood abuse and how it affects us, and explaining it to us in a way that we can understand. So I'm really excited about that. So that might even start before January. We'll see, but that's definitely in the works. And again, we'll be recording, and I'll be recording, and the episodes will go out on Monday. So we'll have them continue to go out on Monday for the beginning of January at least. And then the other exciting thing that I got going on is I have completely rewritten the Women's Childhood Abuse Healing Workshop. And we're going to be kicking that off after the first of the year. And that is powerful. That is an 8-week workshop you're going to work, and it's for women only. And it's for women who maybe they haven't even begun their healing yet, or they've begun their healing and they want more. They want to go deeper. And so you're going to get in there and you're going to work, you're going to have homework, you're going to have a community. And the beautiful thing is, once you're done with the 8-week workshop, you're not, okay, it was nice knowing you. There's a community that we're building that you get to be in that community. And it's only women who've gone through the workshop that are going to be in that community. And we can support each other and encourage each other. I'll be interacting with them as well. Dana Diaz is my partner in crime on this, and she's also going to be involved in that as well. And so, it's just it's similar to the workshop that I took back in 2001 that really propelled a lot of my healing. It's just how I actually rewrote it is just kind of like the podcast, where I thought about, what is it I needed 20, 30 years ago when I was on my healing journey? What was it I needed that would have helped me, you know, get on the healing journey a lot faster and get through it a lot quicker? And so that's how I created it, is based on that. And so by the end of the workshop, you are going to have a toolbox full of tools that are going to help you continue on with your healing. And I mean, through the workshop, you're going to do a lot of healing, a lot of deep healing, but it's going to continue on after. And you're going to have the support system there for you as well. So you're not doing this alone, because that's the thing that so many people feel when they're going through this, is they're alone. And that's not a good feeling. You were alone as a child, and now alone as an adult trying to manage this. And it can't be done like that. You need a support system around you. And so I am really excited about that. I've already got the website up for that. So if anybody wants to go look at it, it's www.womenschildhoodabusehhealingworkshop.com. And there's all the information. We are starting, I'll say this here, we are starting not a beta group. What do we call it?
Pilot.
Thank you. Just went out the window. We were calling it a beta group for so long. I hate that name. But a pilot group in January. So if anybody, and it's not going to cost you anything, we just want your feedback. So if anybody's interested, go ahead and go to the workshop website again, which is Women's Childhood Abuse Healing Workshop.com. And you can sign up there for now, but we'll also have a landing page that we'll be getting out as well. But yeah, a lot going on next year. I'm still working on figuring out, different things to do with the podcast, but for now, that's what's going on. That's a lot.
So that's a lot. And
it's exciting. It's so exciting.
So even like with this, what because it's something that I think it was interesting to, I don't know where we thought, was it on my podcast? We talked about how like there's still some doubt or something that gets in a way, and how do you deal with the mix between excitement and then doubt and then excitement and then like, because like it's something that I have experienced a lot with my projects that I'm doing, and a lot of it is our mind, but how do you navigate that? Because I know it's super exciting, and I know it's like really good, because I have seen behind the scenes stuff, but it is really good, and I know how much work you're putting into it. Like you're literally pouring it all into it. So how do you navigate that? Because it is a lot.
It is a lot. And it's funny. And I think what I was talking about on your podcast, or whatever I was talking with you, is for so long when I've been building it, like I have no doubt it's going to do really well. And it's not because I did it, but it's because I know it's a huge need out there. And I've also talked about God's helped me create this thing, and it's really powerful. And so it's just recently that like the thoughts come in, like, what if nobody shows up? What if nobody shows up? Right. And I'm like, you know what? If only one person shows up, it's a start. It's one person getting better. And so I know it's good. And I know it's the stuff that I would have needed to help me. And so I just go, you know what? I don't know. I'm just going to put my head down and keep working. I don't know. I don't let it slow me down. I do not let it stop me, because I'm so passionate about getting something out there to help people. And I know it will. And it may take time to grow. It may. I may only have one for the first workshop, and hey, she's precious. I'll take her.
So, do you have any closing thoughts or closing message as we close off your season
My
one?
season one. Well, I want to thank all the listeners for listening and supporting, and I honestly pray that it helps you. I think season two is going to be even better, so keep on listening. If you're interested in the workshop, please contact me. Even if you have questions, even if it may not be right now, it's okay. Definitely reach out to me. And keep taking those baby steps. They may not feel like you're where you want to be right now, but you're headed in that direction with every baby step that you take. And even if you take a couple steps back, it's okay. It's all right. It's a journey. It's a journey. So I want to thank my listeners for listening and supporting me, and it helps spread the word, because the number one purpose of this podcast is to help others. And so if you know someone who's in pain or suffering, or maybe there's one you listen to, you're like, wow, this could really help them, share it with them. Share it with them. And I'm not competing with any other podcast either. So if you know of other podcasts that help you, great. I'm not in competition. We're all here to help.
Yeah, and even better, share it with us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's always
Definitely.
something to learn. There's always something or new perspective, a new kind of angle to look at things from.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the beauty of it, of even
Mm-hmm.
like having so many people working on helping others with healing and getting better. There's always something that we can learn and get new ideas, new perspectives, and be like, whoa, I haven't thought about this. That's
Yeah.
the beauty of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Seriously, because I've had a lot of aha moments on my podcast with the guests, a lot, of them sharing something in their life, or an expert giving us clarity on something. And it's like, oh, it makes so much sense.
Yeah. All right. So that's the last episode of the season,
It's
I
the last
guess.
episode of season one.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
And 2024.
And 2024. Looking forward to 2025. It's going to be even bigger and better.